Welcome everyone in Shio, hello in Cherokee, as we learned in our adventure session with Cherokee Elder Gil Jackson last year, where we learned stories and languages and legacies here in the Eastern Band of Cherokee Territory. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Julie Jedkins with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and I'm here with my colleagues, Vaughn Tron and Alyssa Reck. And we've been so privileged to work with all of the staff and volunteers and presenters creating this adventure series. As many of you do know, the Appalachian Trail, it's a unit of our national park system and a long distance hiking trail and walking path. It goes for 14 states from Georgia to Maine. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy, or ATC, is a nonprofit that works with hundreds of partners and communities, thousands of volunteers to make sure that the trail is an experience everyone can learn from. And even going beyond the hiking experience, ATC works for the health and humanity of a connected landscape that the trail threads together. We're very excited to offer this virtual adventure series, which is geared for young people, but it's engaging for all ages. Last year, we took a hike up the trail from Georgia to Maine, exploring different subjects connected to the trail in each state with local educators and partners. This year, we're exploring cultural heritage and social and natural history along the AT. This series covers a wide range of topics, from how heritage and history can be expressed through art and creative writing to the importance of acknowledging native lands and what that means. This year's series is supported by Osprey, a fantastic partner of ATC who's been giving and supporting important trail programs since 1999. Please check out the sessions that you've missed on our YouTube channel, which can be found on our adventure page. We are so thrilled that you've joined us for this sessions on Indigenous history and sacred connections to the land of the Appalachian Mountains. I'd like to begin our session by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships with nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and cultures. So please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our presenters for this adventure series. Now I'm about to woo you with all of their abundant titles and many different hats and jobs and their roles as leaders in integrating and uplifting community-based Indigenous traditional knowledge into practice. But what's really most special about this conversation and session is that they're both showing up as themselves and as humans, sharing stories and complex, difficult histories that really help us navigate this North Star of justice and healing by uncovering truths, by opening us all up to this conversation. So for parents and teachers of young ones, please be mindful. This dialogue might be difficult to hear, and we can't leave out the aspects of violence when we're talking about Indigenous history. So I'm here to hold us in this this brave space for these conversations, and to welcome you all to engage with us through this learning. Trey Adcock is here as an executive director with the Center of Native Health and associate professor of interdisciplinary studies, and is the director of American Indian and Indigenous Studies at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. He actually participated in our education program back in 2013 with a Trail to Every Classroom, which is hosted by ATC and is hiked multiple portions of the South with his friends and with his family. And as he noted yesterday, he's so good at just looking for spaces of hope in this work. Jay Levy and serves as ATC's Indigenous Research and Partnerships Coordinator. Jay holds a master's in wildlife conservation and anthropology. And in the past, he's worked for FEMA as a tribal affairs specialist. He's worked with the U.S. Forestry Department, Maine's Baxter State Park, and the Appalachian Mountain Club as a ridge runner. He's, well, I'm going to leave it to both of them to describe more about themselves, and I'm going to kick it to you first, Jay. Thank you so much for being with us.
Akwe, Jay Nawisawank, Wigwaman, Natai Pikwa Quinantucket, Katapatamayamon Somi Wami Awiak Yotai. Hello and welcome. My name is Jay. I am on Pequot territory in Connecticut, and I'm very happy that you all are able to join us, and thank you for being here. This is a picture of the Scattercoke Indian Reservation in Connecticut on the Appalachian Trail. Up until recently, about 2 months ago, it was relocated off of the off of the Appalachian Trail. So now the Appalachian Trail is rerouted around the reservation. They are a state recognized tribe in Connecticut, and most people don't even know that they're going through it. But the reason why the tribe wanted for so many years to have the AT avoid the reservation was because of culturally sensitive areas that the trail went through. So kind of a historic moment where the trail is no longer on the reservation, but it is still on ancestral territories of the Scattercoke people. Before I start off my presentation, I wanted to mention Jay Lynn. She is a founder of Native Women's Wilderness, and I just wanted to read a quote from her. And it's kind of the theme of this presentation. And she always opens up with a quote saying, "Whose land are you exploring on?" And that's just a thought that, you know, I think we need to consider when we're out walking around and even going to Dunkin' Donuts. You know, where are we? You know, and whose land is this? We call North America Turtle Island, and all life started on the back of a turtle. This is what we call our homeland. You know, our creation stories begin on the back of a giant turtle. And you could even see in this image, North America looks like a turtle, a big giant turtle. And they say that the ridge of the turtle's back on the carapace, I have one here. I don't know if anyone can see that, but the ridge on the carapace is the Appalachians, is the Appalachian Mountains on the giant turtle. Indian people have occupied this land for over 20, 30,000 years. And before the AT was even established, there were trails in the Appalachians for thousands of years traveled by the indigenous people of Turtle Island. You know, we have a long history here connected to the landscape. You know, history didn't begin 500 years ago. The land is where our people began life. You know, our people have been stewards of this land for generations, taking care of the land. We've been taking care of the land for hundreds of generations before settlers arrived. You know, these mountains contain sacred places or sacred ecosystems, the places where people live, what our stories are about, how the landscapes was created, and songs were shared up and down the East Coast through the Appalachian Mountains. One song in particular started down in the Cherokee Territory. Hawe, hayone, we, hawe, hayone. And it traveled up through the Appalachians to the Lenape people in Delaware and New Jersey. Away, hey, hey, hayune, away, hey, hey, hayune, away, hoo, hey, ha, way, hoo, hey, ha, way, oh, away, ha, way, oh, away, ha. and then veered off to the west to the Iroquois people, and then down into Connecticut to the Pequot and the Wampanoag people in Massachusetts. Away, Hayone, way, highway, Hayone. And these songs just traveled up and down the Appalachians. You know, we sing these Cherokee stomp songs up here in the New England area. And we have alligator songs in Connecticut, and we don't have alligators here, but they come from the Seminole people down in Florida. And all this land is where our ancestors walked on, you know, and I continually say that we have the history with this land. You know, in the forests, we gather our medicines. And like I said, we sing, we pray, we teach our youth, our cultural values, and the trails lead to our history and lead to these stories. These landmarks are in the forests still, and they lead to our ancestors' homes. The concept of the land being sacred is what we call Aki Witapotam. And in order to understand that, you need to understand the history of the land and understand our connection to the earth, our connection to the land. And that connection is a part of us. You know, the land is a part of us, and we are part of it. You know, others may own the land, but we as Indigenous people belong to the land. You know, my friend and tribal matriarch, Trudy Lamb Richmond from the Scattercoke tribal nation, said that the land does not belong to the people, but rather the people belong to the land. And that is our relationship with the land. You know, we have a connection to it, and we connect to it in many ways. And one way is through our language. You know, our Indigenous language started off as a vibration from the land, and the Creator took that vibration from the land and turned it into our language. And so when we speak our language, or when we sing in our language, or when we pray in our language, we are connecting back to the land. This is my hike up Mount Osceola. And ironically, you know, this is up in New Hampshire, and Osceola is a Seminole leader down in Florida, who led a resistance in the 1830s during the Indian Removal Act. And he was born near the southernmost mountain of the Appalachians. But I thought this was a beautiful picture to start a conversation of how the land is sacred to us. So as we begin, our origin stories say where we come from, and that is from the land. You know, we come from the land, we come from the soil, we came from the dirt. And as many colors of the soil there are many, all those colors of people. And when we continue through life, the land gives us that life. It gives us food, it gives us our crops. You know, we eat from the land. The land provides us resources, our plants, our medicines, such as the birch tree. You know, we extract the oil from it for our antiseptic wounds. It constantly gives to us this land. So we learn from it. And as we grow, we continue to learn from the land. You know, it teaches us to give. It teaches us how to be good human beings and how to be thankful. You know, there are many, many stories of the land, and I'm unable to fit them all in this 20-minute presentation. But part of learning and those teachings that the land gives us are so valuable that we need to continue to care for the land. And so we care for it, and we must take care of it so it will take care of us. And that is our job. You know, our contribution is ecology. You know, it is a way of life. It is how we relate to the environment and how we keep balance. And when we pass on and when we leave this earth, we go back to the land. We go back to the earth and fulfill that cycle. And that is why the land is sacred. You know, I started off with Indigenous people being here for 20 to 30,000 years. And up until recent history, Indigenous people have many, many scars. And one of the first stories that comes through our oral history is about a great white bird. And this is a painting by a good friend of mine, elder from the Mohegan tribe, William Andrews. And this represents that great white bird that came across the waters and brought and changed life forever. And it brought the European invasion. And that great white bird was the boat that was seen from the shores. And in 1540, it landed in Georgia. And in 1585, it landed in North Carolina. 1606 in Virginia, and 1609, it went up the Hudson in New York. And of course, in 1621 with the Pilgrims in Massachusetts. But Indigenous people are constantly correcting the colonial narrative of terra nullius. And terra nullius is a Latin term meaning the land belongs to no one, justifying the seizure of territory. It is the idea that the land was unimproved before settler colonialism, and that only enlightened individuals can improve this wild, untamed landscape. You know, colonists did not improve the landscape, but were only successful in exploiting the natural resources and destroying the cultural resources. You know, Indian people have been historically been displaced from their homelands through warfare, disease, forced relocation, broken treaties, displacement, colonization, assimilation. You know, they implemented laws and policies to undermine treaty agreements, and the land was seen as abandoned and confiscated and stolen. This is a map, a portion of the New England and Mid-Atlantic region of the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail is in red there. And when the Europeans first colonized this area, the way they dealt with Indian people or the Indian problem was through war and massacre, and it was all over land. There were even bounties for Indian scalps. And the New York area that the Appalachian Trail goes through was Wappinger territory. And the Wappinger were a people that lived in that area, and the governor of Manhattan declared a feast to give thanks after massacring the Wappinger Indians and ultimately cutting off their heads and kicking around their heads in the streets through Manhattan. You know, tribes became landless, and just imagine that concept of losing your connection to your mother. You know, that is our relationship to the land. And now we have been displaced from it. So I imagine that must have been, and still is, very hard to deal with. This area here is the Scattercoke Indian Reservation that I talked about, which is on the Appalachian Trail. Well, up until 2 months ago in September when it was relocated. And that reservation was established in 1736. It was 2,000 acres, and now it's only 400 acres. So soon after the reservation system was enacted in New England, many of the Indian people were put into slavery and became indentured servants, were shipped out to the Caribbean. And things changed drastically. And to the Lenape people that lived in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York area, or some people call them the Delaware, they were cheated out of their lands in 1737 with the Walking Purchase or the Walking Treaty, which was brought up by Thomas Penn, who is the son of William Penn, which Pennsylvania is named after. And he cheated the tribe out of these lands with an elaborate scheme. And he brought up a treaty that was never signed, a treaty that no one knew about, and some say that he'd made up. And in order to survey the land for that treaty, he determined it to be a 1.5 days walk from the Delaware River. And he got the fastest runners, not walkers, and cleared the land so that these marathon runners can get through more easily the woods, and determined this land. And they ran from the Delaware River all the way through Lehigh Gap on the Appalachian Trail. And just right above it, that's where they stopped. And from that point, they went straight to the Delaware Water Gap, where the Delaware River is. And that's about a million acres that was stolen from the Lenape, and they were forced to move on out of there. And this continued on with the Stockbridge-Munsee band of Mohegans that are in the Massachusetts area of the Appalachian Trail. And due to pressure from the US government and expanding colonies and settler encroachments, they joined a Brotherton movement and left this area to New York, and then were forced out of there, and then ultimately into Wisconsin, where they are now. So they left their homelands, which is Massachusetts. And then, of course, maybe Trey will pick up on, in the 1830s with Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act down in Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee, the Trail of Tears was a result of land stolen from the Cherokee. And I believe in the Treaty of Nui Chota, Springer Mountain was included in that treaty, I believe. So again, it just continued on in 1887 with the General Allotment Act, which was successful in removing lands from tribes. Indian identification was removed. It was considered in law in West Virginia that Indians did not exist. And the Abenaki who live along the trail in Vermont were subject to sterilization in 1925. And essentially, Indian people were becoming erased. This is a map from Native Lands that shows the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. And the lands ultimately became public domain and public land. Ancestral territories became public lands ultimately. And today, many of our cultural resources, our sacred places, reside on these public lands. As Sandy Mara, the CEO of ATC, mentioned, that the AT is the largest protected space east of the Mississippi. The ATC protects and conserves these lands, which include all of these sacred places. The Appalachians are home to many tribes and countless sacred spaces. Native peoples across the United States are trying to protect their own homelands. Everyone could protect their churches, but Native peoples struggle to protect their sacred places and their traditional grounds. Along the AT, we have many, many stories of little people. We have them all the way up in Maine and all the way down to Georgia. And they protect the hills, and they're mischievous, and they grant favors to those that keep the earth well. And we also have giants. And this is a giant called Gluskop. And his lodge is up in Katahdin, the northernmost terminus of the AT. But we also have other giants throughout the trails, Hobomok and Moshe. Now this petroglyph is right pretty close to the AT on the Penobscot River, and it's about 1,000 years old. But Gluskop was a positive force, and his landmarks are throughout the woods, and his teachings and lessons are there. And he shows us a way to respect the land and the water and the living animals. We also have place names that are along the trail. This is Godagwajo. That's what the Abenaki people call Mount Washington. Godagwajo means hidden mountain. And it's a way that we revitalize our language. There was a time where it was outlawed to speak our own language. We were punished and beaten. And it's a reminder that we are not erased. And like I said, there are many, many stories along the AT And this is a story that comes from Mulberry Place, which many people know as Clingman's Dome. And this is a place where the Bear Council and other animal councils met. And if you're more interested in this story, you could check out a past adventure series by Gil Jackson called North Carolina Legends in the Language of Cherokee. So check that out. Katahdin is a sacred spot for the Penobscot people. Every year they have a 100-mile spiritual run and paddle from Indian Island to Katahdin. And the song you heard in the beginning talked about that spiritual run. And it was sung by Kelly Demons, a Penobscot woman. So in the Appalachians, we have our stories and about our landscapes, and it's like our library. You know, we bring our children to the outdoors, to our sacred places, and we teach them here. You know, we teach them what the land gives us and how the land takes care of us and what it provides us. It teaches us, like I said, how to be thankful and say thanks and being respectful. The land keeps us well and it heals us. This was a hike I led last week with the Mohegans and some of the Mohegan youths. And they have an oral tradition, oral history that their people left the Lenape in New Jersey area and went north, their clan. And they hit the Mohawks and then went east over the Taconic Ridge, which is a part of the Appalachians on the Connecticut and New York border. And this is where this young man is standing, is on the Appalachians on Bear Mountain, the highest peak in Connecticut, and the Taconics. And this is where his ancestors came and looked just like he is looking down into Connecticut and making that decision to settle down in there. And this was hundreds of years before settlers arrived. So, you know, as Trey mentioned, I read Trey's article, and if you all have an interest to read his article, please do. It's in the AT Journeys called Native Lands. And Trey mentions that it is these cultural practices that center us in who we are. And that's exactly what we are doing. So I just want to say thanks. I just want to say thanks for the ATC for getting a Native perspective on the Appalachian Trail. And since it is Native American Heritage Month, I hope that educators also get a Native perspective on the holiday of Thanksgiving. We see Thanksgiving very differently. It is sometimes a day of sadness, a day of mourning, a day we don't celebrate only one day a year. Actually, the first day of Thanksgiving was officially recognized by Governor Winthrop in 1637 to celebrate the safe return of men from Massachusetts who went to Connecticut to participate in the massacre of the Pequots, my wife and children's people. But we've always had celebrations of Thanksgivings, and we have celebrations every month. In June, we have celebration for the strawberries that come up, those first medicines. And every day we say thanks. We say thanks for the life that we are given and being able to wake up and experience life. So I just want to say Katapatush, Tabatni, and thank you.
So, every time I do this, I regret going second. Yeah, Jay, that was awesome, man. And thank you for those words. And, just, man, it's a lot of history to run through and so much to introduce. And sometimes, as I get invited to do these talks, I, to be honest, get overwhelmed with trying to, answer that question, what do these places mean and how can we teach about them and think about them? And anyways, that was really excellent. I learned a lot and really appreciate it. So I'll introduce myself and a little bit about, my thoughts on the Appalachian Trail and outdoor education. And so Shio Nagad Trey Dogwado Gali Eliga Jigago Wata Toki Tokiasti, so hello everybody, really glad to be here and glad to see you. I am living and I work on what Cherokee people refer to as Tokiasti, which is the place where they race, or the race place. These lands have other names too. You might see Jaligi Ueti, which is Old Cherokee, Jaligi Ahehli, which is Cherokee Nation, and again, Tokiasti. And I'll show you some maps and kind of break that down. But again, just to introduce myself, I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. There are 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes. The Eastern Band, which is here in Cherokee, North Carolina, also in Graham County, in Cherokee County, Cherokee Nation, Oklahoma, and United Gadua Band. I think it's important just to recognize all 3. So I am a citizen. I began my professional career teaching in the public schools down in Savannah, Georgia. This is my very first class I ever taught. I taught high school social studies for a number of years, and have spent the last 15-20 years in the field of education, now at UNC Asheville, where I am the director of American Indian Indigenous Studies. We have a small minor program that started in 2018. One of the things I'm really proud of with that introduction to the university is we also teach an Indigenous language. We teach Cherokee language on campus, primarily led by Gil Jackson, who is a friend of Jay's and mine and Julie's, and fluent speaker, really strong speaker, and an extremely good hiker. He hiked the AT at the age of 64, so not long ago. But he teaches Cherokee language on campus, and hosts a Cherokee coffee hour every week, which is really cool. I do edit the Journal of Cherokee Studies, so if you're interested in Cherokee history, you can find a lot of that stuff online. And then recently, I've become the executive director for the Center for Native Health, which is a nonprofit in the community. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk about the center's work. I think we're really involved in doing some really cool stuff. And the project that I'm most excited about right now is working with different groups in the community to revitalize traditional birthing practices. And so that's pretty exciting to be a part of. So my connection to this topic, I have hiked for a large part of my life. Being outdoors, I think Jay gave you a great orientation to that and what it can mean. And strictly for the AT, I've hiked the AT. I've taken my kids on the AT. This is Max Patch up in Madison County. As Julie mentioned, I participated in the Trail to Every Classroom program, which was tremendous. And if you have not done that, really recommend it. And my family continues to hike and explore the Appalachian Trail in a variety of ways. I think this is Little Hump. Maybe it's Max. I can't think it's Little Hump. My son did Outward Bound this summer out in Utah. And again, we're a family that values the Appalachian Trail. With that being said, as Jay said, much of the Appalachian Trail, at least in the Southeast, cuts through the historical territory of Cherokee people. This is Jaligi Ahehli prior to the turn of the 20th century after removal, but this shows our traditional territory, which was vast. And this does not include our origin stories, our migration stories, but this is sort of our political boundaries, our territory, and the Appalachian Trail lands run through much of this. And one of the things I try and point out, really there are terms now that are used to describe Native populations as if they were not these things. So urban, cosmopolitan. And I think one of the points I would like to make is that, these were not uninhabited spaces. These were not spaces without complex systems of governance and complex economic systems and religious systems, if you want to use that word. I mean, you can just see from this map, there are lots of Cherokee people. And there are also non-Cherokee people, but also Native people living within our territory. teaching us and learning from us as well. But there's a lot to be said about this and how far Cherokee people were traveling, and who they were engaging with and interacting. So this notion that now all of a sudden we're global, I just find that to be not true. I think we've always been global people in a lot of ways, and in very different ways. So I do want to start. I think one thing about a good place to start as it connects to issues of place is just in our name and who we are. Most people know us as Cherokee people, and depending on who you talk to, I think the vast majority of people that I know and engage with and interact with would tell you that the term Cherokee has no meaning in the language. That is someone else's definition of who we are. Now, maybe that is a bastardization of a Cherokee word, but I think it's generally agreed upon that that term really has no meaning and use in the language. It's been, in a sense, brought into the language with the term jalagi. So sometimes you will see that, jalagi. And that is sort of our interpretation and translation of the term Cherokee. The other term you often see is Ani Yawiya, which is the real people or the principal people. And so some people that's their definition of who we are. You might hear it in some form of the human beings. But what I have been taught by a number of people is that who we truly are Gadua people. And you can see this term in the bottom left, Gadua, Gatua. This is an actual place. And it's not far from Cherokee, North Carolina. It was a place that the tribe actually bought back in the early 2000s. And just in the last month, this land has been put into trust under Chief Sneed's administration, working with the Department of Interior. But this is an important place. This is a sacred place. It's described as the mother town. It's described as our birthplace. But in the language, that term breaks down into, the root word is gada, which is dirt. And Gadua, if you really break it down and you ask a really strong speaker like Gil or someone like Tom Belt or many of my elders, what they teach me is that this translates into dirt given by a third person. So when you put the Ani in front of it, it's people. So what we're really saying is we are people of this particular dirt given to us by the Creator. To me, that's, I don't know about all of you, but that's very, very powerful. And what it represents in teaching me who I am, and teaching my daughter who she is, and teaching us who we are as a people. And there are responsibilities that come with that. And the landscape teaches us those things. So these are just pictures. The mound is really small because historically it was burnt down to the ground by British expeditions. It was farmed over, it was bulldozed over. So what we have left is tiny. But this mound faced east towards the waterway right here. And it faced east for a reason. And this was a peace town. Gadua was a peace town. No blood could be shed. And so it's a extremely special place. I've also been taught it's the place where we became to understand who we are and the laws that we are to live by, and how, I think most importantly, we are to treat each other. I also would tell you it's a living place. This is really recently where they have introduced young Cherokee people to gardening. Reintroduced, I guess I should say. And a lot of these gardens are built in astronomical patterns, in basket patterns, and different patterns that mean stuff to us to connect us both the place and to the sky, what's above us, and I would also tell you what's below us. So these are living places. These are not places of the historic past. As Jay said, this landscape is full of stories. This is one of my favorite stories. One of our favorite figures that was active in this landscape, and I know people that could tell you this is where this person hunted and resided. But this is Spearfinger, and Spearfinger, oof, My daughter won't even read the stories. They're so scary. Uh, but I could go on and on about Spearfinger, but you can tell she had this like really elongated finger. And she was an old woman that could change to meet her needs. I'll say that. And she would feast on the unexpected. And so we have lots of stories about Spearfinger that teaches certain things. It was recently translated into a children's book. So this is all the Cherokee syllabary. And this is describing her process of transformation. But this is not, a myth or a legend for Cherokee people. These are real, and they have geographical places associated. The artist that did this is an amazing Eastern Band artist. Her name is Luzine Hill. And you can check her out online. She's really amazing. Another prominent figure in this landscape is Jutkala. There is a petroglyph, I guess if some people will define it that way. But this right here is a picture of Jutkala Rock, not far from where I'm at now. This is sort of a scan of it. And I'm not going to get into all of the representation here, partly because that's not my responsibility. I would just say that these things are not simply rocks or carvings. They also teach us. Maybe they teach us about what's above us. Maybe they teach us about where we come from. Maybe it calls us to do and be in certain ways. But Jutkala, popularly in Asheville, people know Devil's Courthouse along the Blue Ridge Parkway. We know this is Jutkala's home. This is where he lived. He was a giant, but he had a wife, a Cherokee wife. He had a family. I've heard Tom Belt, who's an elder in the community, describe him as the first great Cherokee teacher. In terms of our ethics and responsibility to the land and to the animals and the plants. And he was a protector. And I can tell you, there are places that are marked in these mountains where he both resided, where he was active, and maybe where he still is. So again, these places are not of the distant past, they're of the present. Oh my gosh, I'm not going too long. Another place, I'll just mention this, which Jay sort of mentioned, which is a place on the Appalachian Trail, which is the Mulberry Place, the Bears Council House, Klingman's Dome. And there's a lot of important stories and relationships between Klingman's Dome and Gadua, also on the Appalachian Trail. Again, not only do we have stories, but this landscape provides for us. I don't know if you know about Cherokee Baskets, but one of the things we're really proud about, and we still have people that are making tremendous baskets. This is a river cane basket. So along our waterways, some people will look at it and they think it's bamboo, but it's river cane, which is an endangered plant. And different groups are trying to bring it back. This is Lucille Lossey's basket. She's one of the amazing basket makers in our community. So it provides resources for us to do things like baskets. It also provides food and nourishment. These are, a lot of people call them hen of the woods or chicken of the woods. We call them we-she. And so there's a specific time of the year and a specific way you harvest them, but this landscape also feeds us. And again, there are multiple places where the Appalachian Trail intersects with our traditional territory. So I think this is why I was asked to talk. This is the question that I get pretty daily now, which is, how do we acknowledge this land? And there are a lot of organizations, museums, schools, churches, nonprofits that are looking to do what we call land acknowledgements. The University of North Carolina, Asheville, we passed ours this 2020. We worked through a community group. And so we did, I liked our process. It was community-based and community-oriented. We did ask for permission from the tribe. We went to tribal council and asked permission to do it. If you go to their website, they actually ask people if you're interested in doing a land acknowledgement, you're in Cherokee Territory, to try and reach out and engage with them in that process. And that's just their version and their strategy. Not everyone is the same. 574 federally recognized tribes and many more. But land acknowledgement is a complicated process. I do think there can be some positives. I do think that one thing that I would just caution, one of the things I think that comes up in these land acknowledgement is this idea of ownership. And I think we still think of land, and it makes sense in the United States. Our understanding of land is often informed by real estate, the legality of that, the financial pieces of that, and really based on this Western capitalist understanding of land ownership. And so I think we have to be careful when we say the Cherokees own this land. I think that relationship to that term is different. So anyways, this is the banner that we put. If you go to our library now, this is the banner that flies proclaiming the university to be residing on the lands of the Cherokee. Just kind of putting this all together, one of the projects I'm really interested in is reorienting people to this space. Most of the maps you see in Asheville use English names and English terminology. This is not Cherokee. This is up in Sioux country. What I'm interested though is kind of recreating this map, but from a Cherokee perspective. How can we name this landscape, reclaim this landscape, and reorient people both in the language and into all the stories and places that are here. So I think a question that I'm always wrestling with, both in these articles and in my daily work, is what can action actually look like? And that's a good question. At the higher education level, maybe that's hiring more faculty. I had a conversation yesterday about a municipality wanting to provide affordable housing to Cherokee people to live here, because Asheville is one of the most expensive towns in North Carolina. And so you want Cherokee people to be here and to work in, have jobs and have lives. One of the things they're exploring is to build affordable housing for Cherokee people to live and reside in Asheville. I contacted a bank the other day. They want to donate proceeds to Native nonprofits. So there's lots of ways action can look. I think from a teacher perspective, an education perspective, it's going back to the place and to the land and looking at how we can not ignore it, but include it deeply in our teaching and our pedagogy. And so there's a lot of different resources. For Cherokee people, we were a mound people. There are lots of mounds in this landscape. And so simply just reclaiming a place like Niquashi, which is in the town of Franklin. I saw somebody from Franklin was here. That's in the language known as Startown. Maybe it was a place of astronomy, Cherokee astronomy. So reclaiming some of that. Even doing an interdisciplinary lesson out at Gadua around air and water quality. There's a lot of different, I think, connections to these places that as educators we have a responsibility to teach. And I think Jay gave you an awesome overview of some of the history. And I think we have to be careful that all of this is good history. It's, as Jay mentioned, can be traumatic. And we have a responsibility to also teach that. And this goes along, same thing with this last piece. You can find this online on YouTube. TJ Holland, a great friend of mine, did a great talk on the waterways in Western North Carolina and how these waterways fit into our cosmography and cosmology. So how do we teach these things? It's a tough question, but a good question. If you're interested in diving into this topic further, and I would really implore you to do so, there are resources online for you, and they're really not that hard to find. I didn't really kill myself to find resources to present to you to think about traditional ecological knowledge. Some people will say TEK, T-E-K. There are lots of resources out there. Jay is probably more of an expert on this than I am, but lots of great resources across Native communities, across Indigenous communities. I mean, this last one is in Australia with an Indigenous community. But I think a central point here is listening and learning from the Native people themselves, be willing to collaborate, and deeply integrating place into your teaching and learning. So, oh man, we only got 3 minutes. So
Thank you.
I'll just say, Shki, Wado, thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Trey, and I apologize earlier that my computer froze. If everyone could just join me in saying thank you to both Jay and Trey for sharing your perspectives and your stories and your songs and the work that you're doing. We're very grateful for all of it. And I'm going to turn it to Vaughn for our raffle and to Jay to tell us about wampum.
Yes, so we have this beautiful necklace, wampum necklace and keychain that Jay has offered for the raffle. Jay, do you want to give us some insight on this?
Yeah, wampum was given to us from the creator. It is food and a material. It was ornamental and ceremonial. When woven, it was a record. It recorded history, told stories. It binded contracts and agreements by truth. Like this wampum belt. This is imitation wampum, but when woven up, it told those stories and agreements and marriages. But it came from the quahog shell and the whelk shell, the white part and the purple part, sometimes the white and the quahog as well. But these two items were donated by a Mohegan, Justin Scott, and he works with wampum. He's a wampum artist, and he is very good at it. So I have them here to mail out to a person out there. Good luck.
Such a
Yeah,
generous
that's awesome.
donation. And also, for nearly 100 years, people from all over the world of all ages and backgrounds have helped to keep the dream of the Appalachian Trail a reality. If you love the trail and want to protect, manage, and advocate for it, please consider becoming a steward yourself by joining us as a member or donating today. And we also want to give a very special thanks again to Osprey for their generous contribution to our education programming this year. There's a link to consider joining as a member or donating. And if you'd like to follow our other adventure series and programs that we've offered in the last 2 years, feel free to follow this link. And thank you so much again for joining us. A huge thanks to Jay and Trey, and we appreciate you all.
Thanks
Have a great
everyone
rest
for
of your
joining
day.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you.